Let me introduce Tom Sweeny. When you hear him speak, he has got the ultimate voice for tennis umpiring. We've listened to the latest stories today, Tom, but before we come to Graham as well, and you've already met Eleni, Tom, I'm really curious about your story because it's quite unique, and you had to make some really good life choices. Well, not good, but you had to make some life choices even as a young man if this was going to be the road that you took. So I wonder if you could just start by introducing us to your story.
Thank you. Thank you. My name's Tom. Yeah, I grew up in northeast Victoria in Benalla. So certainly similar to here in that it's a regional centre. We're not anywhere near a capital city. It's 2.5 hours down to Melbourne. I grew up playing AFL and cricket, so I wasn't. I still don't know which end you hold the tennis racket, so I wasn't much of a tennis player myself, but loved sport. Would go down to Melbourne and watch the Australian Open, as well as going down and watching the cricket and watching the footy and watching whatever sport was on TV. So as a kid, I was a general sports lover. And was friends with people at the tennis club. So I was 16 years old, and a pro circuit tournament came to Benalla, and they needed some line umpires to call lines for the finals on the weekend. And it's certainly not how it works now, but back in those days, you would just grab a couple of kids and put them on the lines, and they'd decide if the ball was in or out. So I was very good friends with the president there, and the president said, I'll buy you a sandwich for lunch if you come down and call the lines for the weekend. So I'm obviously quite a cheap date that came for a sandwich, but that certainly was a strange way gateway that's now become my full-time career. Through that, it was then meeting some of the line umpires there who worked in Melbourne had worked at the Australian Open, and suddenly that was the carrot that was dangled in front of me of being 16 and being able to go through the training process and get to work at the Australian Open. It was the excitement of being a country kid, getting to go to the city, get to stay in the city, get a free pair of shoes, actually get paid, earn more money for those 2 weeks than my friends working at Safeway supermarket over the entire summer holidays. So it was the real excitement of the overall package that was ahead of me, which brought me into wanting to be an official. So not all of them the right reasons, but they were the reasons that got me into it. So I got mum to drive me down to Melbourne, and you be a lines person for some under-12s matches and learn the techniques, learn the processes. The next summer I was at my first Australian Open doing the qualifying, and then a couple of days of the main draw, and that pretty much had me hooked in the enjoying the excitements of being part of a professional sport, biggest names, the crowd, the sort of stuff that gives you some goosebumps and the hair standing up on your arm, of the challenge of wanting to give your best performance, and the reward you feel afterwards when you know you've done a good job. That those became my main motivators to continue with officiating. We're lucky with the tennis is certainly our professional season is primarily over the summer, so it's very common for university students, school teachers, people who have summer off to have this as sort of a side thing that they do, and so I was able to continue and progress my officiating through finishing school, going to university, and then when I started a full-time job in Melbourne, I would still take my summers off to be an umpire, and through that went. Someone signed me up one day. Have you thought about chair umpiring, and wrote my name on the list? So it was an accident that I became a chair umpire. Of someone just tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Give it a go," and I thought it might be fun, and certainly never with the expectation that one day it would be my full-time career. when in 2009 I'd been chair umpiring local levels and then even up to juniors at the Australian Open, that I was in a position that I thought I could try and give this a crack to become my full-time profession, or at the very least enjoy some travel while doing it full-time for a short time. And I was probably, and like you said at the start, I was probably in a unique position where, because I was in my mid-20s, I was young, didn't have a partner, didn't have kids, had saved up some money with my full-time job, that I was in the position where I could take the risk and give it a go, knowing that for the first few years you're not going to make any money. In fact, you're going to be losing money when you take into the account international flights, hotels. When you're not working, you're not being housed, so you're paying a lot of hotels and fees, meals out of your own pockets. So it was either going to work and fantastic, and it has worked, or it was going to fail, and at least I had fun sort of taking a gap year and could always go back to my old job. So that was a real unique position that I was in, and it's we have a lot of trouble these days trying to get officials, because it's such a big risk that if you have a family that depend on you for income, if you don't have this stars aligning situation that I had to be able to take that risk, it can be really hard to make that jump into seeing if you're going to be good enough to be a full-time professional official.
What he's failed to mention, he's now done 26 Grand Slam events. 36, sorry. But that's quite an incredible decision that you've made early on, and to end up with that result, from credit to your persistence and your endeavour. The interesting, being a cricketer, footballer from the country, I get the psychic around that, particularly being from Victoria. When you stepped into the official space, what was the peer support like that around that? Was it like, we need you for the footy team? And I mean, just talk through that, because it is a big deal for country kids in environments where they're reliant on everybody playing those team sports that you just mentioned. Was that difficult for you?
It was difficult. I think most of my friends didn't know what I was doing in tennis, that I would disappear for 3-4 weeks of January and then come back, and the most common question was, oh, how was it with the ball boying? And I'd have to explain, no, the ball kids, the ones in the corner, they're under 15 throwing the ball to the players. I'm in line with the line making the decisions, but still not really many people understood what I was doing, no matter how many times I had to repeat that. The cricket team were a bit annoyed. I was wicket keeper, so they'd lose their wicket keeper for about a month, and I still feel I was robbed of a few end of season trophies because I missed some matches as a result. But yeah, I was a little bit more on my own as far as that regards, but certainly people were fascinated in the stories you'd coming back from the city to the country with those stories of the adventures you'd had with the matches. People had seen you on TV in the background and wanted to hear those stories. And through that, we talked about coming through with a group of young people that, friends would start hearing these stories, hearing about the pocket money you're getting, hear about the fun you're having, and suddenly, like a small community of Benalla, having just myself, within 4 years we had 10 of us. So it's that. Sometimes when you're trying to recruit, you grab one person, and the flow-on effect can be fantastic.
Thanks, Tom. I'm going to switch to Graham now. Now, Graham Glassford is from Northern Territory Institute of Sport, looks after sport and officiating. Official yourself in your past life. You've seen the education that was formerly the National Official Scholarships, but you have driven officiating in the Northern Territory to a different level, but you certainly have areas to consider that aren't the same as Eleni's journey, or even Tony's journey, or Tom's journey in being in regional Northern Territory. Do you want to share us a little bit, Tom, about, Graham, about your role and the difficulties that you've got attracting officials up in North?
Look, first off, I don't think they're difficulties. I think they're challenges, but I don't think recruiting officials is actually difficult. I think it's the retention of officials that's the really difficult thing. Interesting hearing sort of Tony talk about, I guess, the lack of networking for officials within Cairns, and certainly that's something that we're trying to drive through the officiating development programs that we're putting in place. So we've worked with Alice Springs, where there's about 30,000 people, and last year we had 2 officiating network sessions. One was with the AFL boys and girls that came along, and we had a great session there. And then a couple of months later, there was the Alice Springs Tennis Open, and so we had a couple of guest speakers along from tennis there, and really tried to get officials from no matter which sport in Alice Springs to come together, and that's worked really well. And we've actually got people in Alice Springs now just starting to talk with one another. You mentioned the NOS program. So this year we've instigated the high performance officiating program across NT, which we've really modelled basically off the NOS. I mean, it's such a successful program. So we thought, look, we'll just we'll take that and run with it, and put a little bit of an NT slant to it, but pretty much kept all the facets in play. And what we've found is that even 2 months in, that we've had people from football, soccer, working with basketball. We had the AFL women's match in Darwin just a couple of weeks ago, and we were fortunate to get a little bit of a behind the scenes look at what the AFL umpires were doing, get into the coach's box and allow the officials to see what was going on there. So our real big push is to ensure that we provide the programs and the opportunities in which to network.
So Graham, a lot on the plate of what you just mentioned there, but resources. Who does all the work, and how do you access that network to get things done?
Yeah, look, that's the real big issue, or the big challenge that faces sport within the Northern Territory. A transient group of people. I've been there for a bit over 12 months, and already in that time, people that I've been dealing with are gone, and so now we're having to start again. So, we're really about trying to build capacity, sustainability, and capability. So they're the three points that we're working with sport. And really just trying to put some plans in place with sport, so that whether it be Graham comes along, or Chris comes along, or Elaine or Tom, or anyone that comes along, that sports actually have something, a bit of a roadmap that they can work off. So we're really wanting to work with sports and drive sports to actually do that. Earlier, probably about 2 weeks ago, Netball NT ran their first ever coaches workshop, where we had 6 coaches from all over the NT. So they coach and mentor, and that's the first time they've ever run that program. So, we're really looking at what can we do to support those people that are trying to build officials.
And the other part of it is, what do you see as the most successful part that you've been able to achieve since you've been there?
Oh, look, I think it's the networking of people, and just all of a sudden bringing people together. Without even having to do anything. So, one of the mentors with football in the high performance officiating program was invited to come along and speak to people within basketball and speak to some female referees, and that was all done off their own volition. And just to know that sort of thing is happening, and we've started that work. Which means that it doesn't need me to be there. It's actually being self-driven, and I think that's been just an absolute wonderful thing to see.
Fantastic. Now I'm not going to ask you any more questions yet, but I am going to switch across to hashtag Ash. Got some questions for us, Ash? She does. Come and join us.
So respect for officials has been brought up a lot this evening, both in the keynote speeches and with the data that was presented by Ash. What strategies do your organisations have to deal with things such as abuse of officials, and how do you deal with it personally?
Eleni, I've been to the odd AFL game, and occasionally you hear somebody yell at an umpire, How do you deal with that?
Oh, look, I think I did kind of touch on it briefly, is that it's really important to remember whose feedback is important to you. And I think Tony touched on that as well, and that, you know, the feedback you get from your family and friends most of the time is very relevant, and the feedback you get from coaches, from fellow umpires. And it's important to just understand that, you know, a lot of people, especially in the football community, go to the football to let themselves go and to have a bit of fun, and they think that's fun. And obviously we don't condone abusing referees or umpires, whatever it might be, but you have to take that with a grain of salt and think, I'm making a decision, and that decision is not what they want to hear. And so hence they're going to be upset with that decision. But it's not personal. It's just about that decision, about that behaviour, not about you as a person. So I think if you can try and separate yourself from what's actually happening and narrow it down to that decision, it's easy to actually move past it, and also to really keep in mind whose feedback is important to you.
So what I'm hearing is that when you're umpiring against Carlton and you don't play a blue Guernsey, you're not going to listen to what Ash Sinnott yells at you across the fence, right? Graham, your thoughts?
Look, I think at elite level, I think that's perfectly right. I think at community level, though, where the barbs can be heard, probably even more so than over the fence, where it's probably just at an AFL game, it's probably just a whole lot of white noise. And I think at a community game, though, it might be a little bit different. Yes, we've got to build resilience into our officials, absolutely. But I think we as in sport need to work harder in terms of officials and sports particularly. So, look, I've worked for the AFL previously to the NTIS, and I still remember walking into the AFL in 2006 for New South Wales and getting up and presenting to the whole team at the end of 2006, and basically on my presentation, rather than putting umpiring department, I put by the way department, because in essence we were the by the way, everything was always last minute. And I think we need to move sports from just making officiating, by the way, to actually being part of the conversation. And so then at junior football or junior sport, that we actually work harder in making sure that we are respecting the official and creating great positive match day environments. And I think that's, and it's not just about officials, it's actually about just anyone out there playing.
At the highest level in tennis, we're probably unique in that avenue, as far as certainly publicly the umpires generally respected. It could come from sitting in such a large chair that everyone has to look up to you, and it's like you're up there on your throne, sort of thing. And generally, when there is that player umpire argument, a lot of the time you'll find that the crowd are booing the player rather than booing the umpire, that there's a real sort of push for players to have to respect the sport and respect the umpire, where that's not the case in a lot of other sports. So I think at the elite level it's not a big issue. We have Tennis Australia, of course, a big promoter for respecting of officials, and that comes all the way through even to our tennis coaches, who recently they've made the decision at a big financial cost that every single under-12s and under-14s nationals match will have a chair umpire. The reason being that they see the importance in having officials where the coach can now talk to the 12-year-old about a match, saying, oh, this is how you're going to work on your forehand and your backhand. Whereas in the past, it would take an hour to say, oh, that girl was calling against me because there was no chair umpire on the court. They see the value that we're there to make a decision so the players can focus on playing. And so we're lucky to have that support at a junior level. The real problem we have is at the grassroots level, that it seems that for some reason young players and crazy parents go hand in hand. And the big issues we have are often not from the kids that are on the court, but it's from mum and dad or whoever on the side, and that's where there's a big disrespect problem that these people on the side of the court aren't only disrespecting the officials, but they're disrespecting the opponent and disrespecting the sport. And I think that's our biggest challenge going forward, is making sure that there's respect all the way from that. The respect that we have at the elite level goes all the way down to the grassroots level.
Thank you, Tom. Ash?
Great segue into grassroots sport. So a lot of people have mentioned mentoring this evening, but more at that higher elite level. How do you think mentoring more at the community level would work, and is it something that officials at your level are interested in doing?
So I think mentoring is really important, and I think the really good thing, and Tony did allude to this as well, is it doesn't have to be an elite umpire at the time to be the mentor. So even at my junior association, I had a couple older people mentoring me, and they didn't ever make it to AFL level, but that didn't matter. I wasn't doing under 8s, and they'd had that more experience than me, were able to mentor me, help me, make the correct decisions, get in the right position, do all those things that are just basic and you need to do as a young umpire. So I think mentoring is so important at the grassroots, and I was lucky enough to come from an association that did promote that, but I know it's still not seen enough, and it's just at times we don't have the resources, but it is important to understand it doesn't have to be an elite level umpire, referee or official to be that mentor. As we talked about and you saw the statistics, we learn off our friends, off our mates who are umpiring as well. And so whether it's not just a mentor but a mates program where you're working together with someone who you can ask those questions to, or ask to come and watch you umpire and give you that feedback. So mentoring is so important. No matter what level the mentor is or the mentee is, everyone can learn, and even the older umpire can learn from the younger umpire too. So it's a two-way street, and I think mentoring is invaluable in any sport or organisation.
I think there's probably two parts to the mentoring. There's the informal and the formal mentoring as well. And I think that's certainly one thing at NTIS that we're working on is, so we've run a couple of mentoring workshops. So we're keen to develop the more formal sense of mentoring, both across officiating and coaching as well, because we just think that's where we're going to get our most bang for buck, if you like, in terms of developing those people. But I think anyone that's successful, probably in life as well as sport, has had someone that's mentored them, whether formally or informally. So I think maybe in officiating we're a little bit slow to embrace that, and I'd certainly say that to the people in the room, that's our next step in terms of officiating is looking at who are those mentors, and certainly a program we put together when I was back working at AFL was even having younger people mentoring other younger people, and 17, 18-year-olds mentoring 14, 15-year-olds, and setting them up, and the skills that the 17 or 18-year-old can learn from mentoring as well, really springboards their development in life as well. And I think we sort of talk about, have we really got enough people? I think they're there. We've just got to ask them the question and actually give them some support. So we need some mentors of mentors of mentors. So you kind of build a bit of a pyramid type system. And I think that's something we need to embrace. It's hard because we don't have a lot of time, and we're busy doing so much other stuff. But I think sometimes if we can just push away some of that stuff and actually focus on the mentoring bit rather than worrying about all the other things, that this will actually really create great officials, create great retention, but we just need to spend some time on it.
There's a lot of organisations that do a signing of a mentor, and that generally comes in the middle way of your pathway when you're trying to get to the elite level. That the governing body might assign you with somebody, and they're your mentor to help guide you through. But that doesn't happen at the grassroots level. It's very rare that you're assigned somebody to be able to help you take that first initial step along your journey. So I think a lot of it comes back to the mentee. It comes to the person who is who's just starting out, that you really actively have to work out what your goals are and try to find out who's going to help you along that road. I've been lucky that all the way across, I certainly haven't had one mentor. I've had a team of mentors that I will go to for different reasons. There's someone that I might talk to about techniques. There's someone who I might talk about social issues outside of tennis that can affect your professional life. That you have a full range of people, and some of them will be inside of your sport, some of them will be outside of your sport, some of them will be right at the top and have been there, and others might be at your same level. But you have as many people you can bounce ideas off as possible. There's not just one person you can learn off, there's many. And if you don't know who they are, start asking those questions. When you're at a tournament, there's going to be more experienced people there than you, so start asking them the right questions. Think about your own development. What do I need to improve? And be asking those questions to these people who have more experience. And if you don't know who they are, start finding out who they are, because they're there and there's always someone willing to help.
Thanks, guys. I'm going to call it quits on the questions for timing reasons, but I do want, where's my good assistant? Nicole, can you just bring up the website, please, with the survey on it? And while you're doing that, I think the observation I've got here, we've flown people in to speak to you about officiating. You have a piece of gold in this community, and there's the passion for officiating. And when I hear Tony talk about her vision of where she wants to take officiating and mentoring, I would encourage you to go to her, not ask something from her, but ask what you can do for her to grow officiating across all the sports here. You heard the passion she has for it. She has an incredible skill set, and I'm sure, I know there's other people in the room with the same thought processes, but work together and make this not just a one-off thing because the Commonwealth Games are here. Make this the true legacy of the Commonwealth Games in terms of officiating, because, as I said right at the start, without officials, there is no sport. And in my opinion, without sport, we don't have a very functional community. Sport is so much about who we are as Australian people. So let's embrace that. Let's use that as the start of something bigger and work together. So I would really encourage you to get to know each other and work together. But as I said, it's the attitude of not what can you get from someone else, what can you give to the community and how can you work together? Because I'm sure there's many, many people that would do great mentoring roles across sport, and that's what's important. So I'm not sure what the future is at the federal level in terms of officiating, but please embrace it and go forth and multiply. We will pop up the survey. Please take a couple of minutes to put some thoughts into responding, because like all of these guys, well, before they go, can you please thank Tom, Graham and Eleni?